Alright, show of hands. How many people here had Firebrand on the list of characters to add to Marvel 3? I know I definitely didn't, so it was kind of a shock to see him as one of the characters added to Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and one of the first announced at that. Firebrand is a member of the Red Armor species, a gargoyle-like class of demons most commonly associated with the Ghosts and Goblins series. While Arthur is the face of Ghosts and Goblins, the Red Armor enemy was actually the very first design conceived for the series, with Arthur being designed afterwards. He's named after the game's main programmer, Toshio Arima, due to the Red Armor's design kind of reminding the staff of Arima. Everyone knows the Ghosts and Goblins games are incredibly difficult, and Red Armors, with their tricky speeds and their erratic movement, are a big reason why that's the case. Firebrand in particular, though, is a unique Red Armor, separate from the one we commonly see in the Ghosts and Goblins games, and is instead the star of his own spin-off series, Gargoyle's Quest. The first game released on the Game Boy in 1990, and was not only Capcom's first game on the system, but as far as I know, Capcom's first ever portable game, period. I wouldn't blame you for thinking this game is probably jank and not fun to play just based off of those facts alone. But Gargoyle's Quest holds up incredibly well gameplay wise and even visually. It's one of the nicer looking Game Boy games. So much so, that some of its sprite work was directly lifted for games like the very first Duke Nukem game for whatever reason. The game was developed for the Game Boy so as not to overshadow the NES port of Ghosts and Goblins, but with the success of Gargoyle's Quest, they proceeded with a sequel, Gargoyle's Quest 2, this time for the NES. Despite the numbering, Gargoyle's Quest 2 is actually a prequel. This game covers the battle that Firebrand's ancestor had with Brager that becomes legend in the Game Boy game, with Firebrand gaining the title of the Red Blaze in the game's ending. It's similar to the first game in structure, but in color and a bit more streamlined. According to Takuro Fujiwara, the creator of the Ghosts and Goblins series and producer on the Gargoyle's Quest games, the development team had a harder time attaining the creative vision on NES than they did on Game Boy, so the decision was made for the third game in the series to be something of a reboot, with a darker, more gothic aesthetic. This in turn gave us one of the most underrated games of the 16-bit era, Demon's Crest. While it's very much in the lineage of Gargoyle's Quest in terms of mechanics, the goal of this game was to provide more freedom for the player in how they progress through the game, and trades the more cartoonist nature of the first two games for an aesthetic more akin to Castlevania. In this entry, Firebrand seeks out a set of legendary elemental crests that bestow great power upon the user, and gives Firebrand new traversal and combat abilities. After that, the series just died. Red Armors would continue to make appearances in the Ghosts and Goblins games, and Ghosts and Goblins would also get spin-offs here and there, most notably the equally underrated Maximo games on PS2. One notable appearance was as a boss character in SNK vs. Capcom SVC Chaos, opposite Goddess Athena on the SNK side. It should be noted that the Red Armor here isn't Firebrand, just a generic Red Armor overall. I'll talk more in detail about that appearance in the eventual SNK Legacy video for him. Firebrand himself entered the Capcom vs. games in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, being one of the first 4 new additions announced alongside the update itself. According to the game's producer Ryota Nitsuma, Firebrand was added because the development team wanted a winged character, and that tracks since Firebrand's spot was originally meant to go to another winged Capcom character, Nina from Breath of Fire. According to Nitsuma, Nina was one of the last characters cut before they finalized the roster additions for Ultimate. She would have been based on the design of the Breath of Fire 1 incarnation, but have moves and spells from across the entire series, with her level 3 summoning every other Nina incarnation for one big attack. The decision to use Firebrand came about because the development team decided they very specifically wanted to implement a winged beast into the roster, and while Nina can transform into a giant bird depending on the game, Firebrand fits that mold more. Firebrand's unique in that he actually doesn't have a credited voice actor in Marvel 3, which makes sense considering his dialogue just consists of grunts and screeches, which are thankfully translated via subtitles. Considering vanilla Marvel 3 didn't have subtitles for intros and victory quotes, I wonder if Firebrand is the reason Ultimate has them. Firebrand is also one of a handful of characters whose name changes depending on the region, being simply designated as a Red Armor in the Japanese version of the game. In any case, there's definitely loads to talk about in regards to Firebrand in the Versus games, so let's get rolling. Firebrand's theme in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is a remix of the title theme from the first Gargoyle's Quest game. Said theme was also used for the main menu screen in Gargoyle's Quest 2. This arrangement has a rock slant with a prominent electric guitar lead on the main melody. Arthur's theme also has a similar rock theming going for it, so I think it's neat that both themes are thematically linked here, which makes sense given their relationship to each other. I don't know, there's just something about 8-bit themes in particular getting high quality music arrangements that makes my heart smile. And just get a load of this guy's auto animation. That's the dance of someone about to fuck up your whole day. Firebrand is largely designed to be just as frustrating to fight against in Marvel as in the Ghosts and Goblins games, but as it turns out, it actually takes some effort on Firebrand's part. Firebrand has some of the best and most varied mobility options in the game. In turn, this allows him to perform some of the dirtiest mix-ups in Marvel 3. He has fairly easy to grasp unblockable setups that shine with the right team composition. And he's pretty good at combo conversions. A lot of his best offensive tools are easily confirmed into full combos. That said, he has some pretty pitiful health. His solo damage is pretty terrible. He has to rely on assists and resets to get consistent damage. And his defense kind of sucks and he crumbles when pressured effectively. Firebrand doesn't have much in the way of command normals, but he does have one worth mentioning, Devil's Claw, done with down and heavy attack. This is a dive kick of sorts, though on hit he'll bounce over the opponent and go into a flight state. This state can be cancelled, and doing so actually allows for some follow-ups as well. We'll get into that in a bit. Firebrand's first special move is Hell Spitfire, done with a quarter circle forward and attack. Firebrand shoots out a fireball that goes in different directions depending on the strength of the attack button pressed. Light goes straight forward. Medium goes upwards diagonally. And heavy is an OTG fireball that hits multiple times. All of these can be done in the air as well.
Yes.
Red armors can shoot projectiles in Ghosts and Goblins, and Firebrand's main method of attack in the Gargoyle's Quest games in particular is with fireballs as well. If Firebrand is close to the edges of the screen, jumping and pressing back twice will initiate a wall cling. While on a wall, Firebrand can use Hell Spitfire simply by pressing an attack button, with the type of fireball changing exactly as it does with Hell Spitfire depending on button strength. One of Firebrand's most effective neutral tactics is the instant wall cling fireball, which allows Firebrand to litter the screen with fireballs way quicker than repeatedly doing Hell Spitfire would. Wall clinging is a central mechanic in the Gargoyle's Quest games, functioning as something akin to a prototype of the wall kick mechanic that the Mega Man X games would later use, though Firebrand stays put instead of sliding down the wall like X does. Bon Voyage is done with the quarter circle forward and the special button.
Good. Good.
Firebrand dives in the opponent's direction, and if he connects, drags them along the ground before slamming them for a wall bounce. This can be done in the air as well. Demon Missile is done with a Dragon Punch motion and attack. The attack that comes out is dependent on the strength of the attack button pressed. The light variation bounces him off of the opponent and puts him into a flight state. And the medium version side switches. The heavy variation is the most interesting. Firebrand hops back and floats a bit before swooping in an all too familiar U-shaped pattern. This is probably the most iconic Red Armor attack, as it's the main way they attack in most Ghosts and Goblins games. This attack also has a unique property. It can be charged, and if it's charged all the way, the swoop becomes completely unblockable, meaning with the right team composition, you can hit opponents with unblockables on incoming to maintain offensive momentum. Competitive player Zach Bennett was the first player to utilize the potential of these unblockables with an absolutely disgustingly good Firebrand, Amaterasu, and Dormammu team. This tech would be iterated on further by player Apology Man, leveraging a Firebrand, Dr. Doom, and Super Squirrel team for even crazier unblockable setups. Incidentally, those are two of the players I'd recommend watching if you want to see top level Firebrand play over the course of the game's lifespan. Hell's Elevator is a command jump Firebrand can do on the ground, his jumping angle changing with button strength. Light sends him straight up, medium up and forward, and heavy up and back. No matter which variation you use, Firebrand ends the move in the flight state. Hell Dive is the inverse. It can only be done in the air and sends Firebrand downwards. Light sends him straight down, medium sends him down and forward, and heavy sends him down and back. The light version in particular is great to use after Devil's Claw, as it allows Firebrand to continue a combo from the ground. Hover is done by doing a quarter circle back and special. This is yet another method to get Firebrand into a flight state, though this one is his most straightforward. Red armors are almost always depicted flying in the air, though hovering is a central mechanic in the Gargoyle's Quest games as well. How long Firebrand can float is tied to a meter there, though collecting new items over the course of the game extends the meter, and usually near the end of the games he gets the ability to hover indefinitely, though that becomes a default feature in Demon's Crest. Firebrand's first hyper combo is Dark Fire, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 attacks.
Awesome!
Firebrand sprays out a stream of purple flame that sweeps upwards, hitting OTG. It's a common combo ender and can be done in the air as well. Darkfire is a special power that usually ends up being one of the last power-ups Firebrand receives in the Gargoyle's Quest games. In the first game in particular, he receives it after defeating Reshafel, which is just the localized name for Lucifer. Firebrand's second hyper combo is Luminous Body, done with a quarter circle back and 2 attacks. This is an install super that turns Firebrand white and increases his speed by a pretty significant margin. This super is a reference to a somewhat obscure mechanic in most versions of the first Ghosts and Goblins game. If an encounter with a red armor lasts for more than a minute, they'll turn white and start moving around even faster and more erratically than usual. Firebrand's level 3 is Chaos Tide, done with a Dragon Punch motion and 2 attacks.
First attack!
Firebrand summons another, smaller red armor who will attack in tandem with Firebrand depending on the button you press. It's like a more expensive, eviler version of Felicia's Kitty Helper super. Interestingly, Luminous Body will actually apply to the Helper as well. The startup animation for this move, as well as Firebrand's overall pre-match intro animation, is a reference to the Red Armor King encounter in the second G&G game, Ghouls and Ghosts, where the Red Armor sits on a mountain of skulls before engaging Arthur. Summoning another Red Armor may also be a nod to a boss added to the Game Boy Advance port of Super Ghouls and Ghosts, the Red Armor Joker. This is a Red Armor that's seemingly a bit older and more grizzled than your usual Red Armor, though this one can also summon smaller ones to help. This same Red Armor also appears in Namco Cross Capcom as an occasional boss, and makes some offhand references to a past War of the Crest. This Red Armor is later in the game revealed to be the hero of that war, implying that this isn't just any Red Armor. This is an older, more battle-hardened Firebrand, and the War of the Crest is most likely the event of Demon's Crest, which is really cool. Firebrand's first assist is the heavy version of Hell's Spitfire.
Crossover attack!
His second assist is the medium variant of Demon Missile.
Crossover attack!
His third assist is the uncharged heavy variant of Demon Missile.
Crossover attack!
Here are Firebrand's colors. Firebrand's second color is blue and yellow, based off of the Capcom logo. His third color is, according to Capcom, based off of a traffic light. Sure, okay. His fourth color is a shout out to a demon with some experience in the Versus games, Blackheart. His fifth color is a reference to the kind of gargoyles you commonly see in metropolitan high-rise architecture. His sixth color doubles as a nod to both the Green Goblin and the original North American box art for the first Gargoyle's Quest, where he's colored green. This was apparently done because the Game Boy's green tinted screen would make him look green to buyers anyway. His alternate costume is the red Armor King armor from Ghouls 'n Ghosts. He even has the horn. Here are Firebrand's interactions in the game. So I wanted to recommend the Gargoyle's Quest game for those that might not have played the series before, but it's a bit tricky because they're all great and hold up pretty damn well, all things considered. So instead, I'm just going to recommend the entire Gargoyle's Quest trilogy. The first game was released for the Game Boy and is honestly pretty ambitious for what it is. And yet, aside from some minor slowdown in later levels, it doesn't feel like many compromises had to be made for that ambition either. The game switches between a top-down overworld presentation akin to an RPG, and a 2D side-scrolling perspective for action sequences and platforming levels. You explore towns, talk to NPCs to get hints on how to proceed, and obtain items and power-ups that allow you to overcome obstacles in the 2D platforming levels and dungeons throughout the overworld. I've heard it compared to Metroidvanias, but I honestly think it plays more like Zelda 2 in terms of structure and presentation, though not anywhere near as punishing. For a 1990 Game Boy game and Capcom's first crack at a portable game altogether, it holds up shockingly well. There's minimal jank, and the game doesn't feel like it throws a bunch at you from off screen that you can't react to, and the music is outstanding given the hardware. The sense of progression is pretty great, and moreover, it's actually an overall easier series than Ghosts and Goblins. I'd say it's almost akin to the difference in the level of control between the classic Mega Man games and the Mega Man X series. The first game isn't wildly expensive to collect physically, but the most convenient way to play is via Nintendo Switch Online, where it's part of the Game Boy catalog. Gargoyle's Quest 2 is the direct sequel, now in full color on the NES. It feels like a bigger, even more polished take on the original Game Boy game, though it does away with random battles altogether, and there's a few more lows in the game's pacing. It's a good sequel, though I think the first game is a tighter experience overall. This game was on the 3DS and Wii U Virtual Console, but as of this video's production, still isn't available on Nintendo Switch Online, which is weird since the rest of the series is. There's also a Game Boy version of this game as well, essentially remaking Gargoyle's Quest 2 in the first game's engine, and it's pretty good. There's even a bonus dungeon exclusive to this version of the game. It only released in Japan, though there's a fan translation. An official localization was actually completed, but never commercially released, though the completed ROM was leaked a few years back. The crown jewel of the series, though, is the 1994 Super Nintendo follow-up, Demon's Crest. In this entry, a war breaks out in the Demon Realm over magical elemental crests containing untold power. Firebrand battles a powerful demon dragon for their crest and manages to narrowly win, but not before another demon by the name of Phalanx swoops in, takes Firebrand's crest, locks him in a coliseum to fight for all eternity, and conquers both the demon and human realms. Firebrand fights in the coliseum for what he thinks is the rest of his days until he's mysteriously set free and given the crest of fire, setting the stage for the rest of the game. Where the first two games were very much in the style of the Ghosts and Goblins games from an aesthetic standpoint, Demon's Crest has a darker, more gothic vibe to it that's similar to another fellow Super Nintendo game, Super Castlevania 4. Like the previous games, Firebrand still obtains spells and abilities from artifacts and scrolls and still largely controls the same, but this game's main inclusion are the elemental crests, which greatly alter Firebrand's mobility and combat prowess, like the Water Crest, which lets him swim, or the Air Crest, which gives him expanded flight capabilities. Actually, kinda reminds me of the Infinity Gems now that I think about it. There's even a crest that controls the flow of time. Whereas the first two games have a pretty linear progression structure overall, Demon's Crest actually opens up at one point to the extent that the game can be progressed through a number of ways, and there's also multiple endings to be found as well. And all of this is brought together by a Mode 7 overworld map that kinda reminds me of Final Fantasy VI as far as execution goes. Of all the games in the series, if you only had to play one, this is the one you should go for. Before their respective sunsetting, it was available on the new Nintendo 3DS and Wii U Virtual Consoles, but the only and thankfully most convenient way to play today is via the Super Nintendo catalog for Nintendo Switch Online, being one of the launch games for the service. I really highly recommend every game though. This is a series that doesn't really seem to get much discussion these days, though everyone I know of that's played them have nothing but good things to say about them. I think people might see the association to Ghosts and Goblins and get scared off because of the difficulty, but they're significantly easier games than that series overall, and while they can get tricky in the later portions, they're a lot more forgiving. Definitely give them a chance if you have the means. Alright, show of hands. When Marvel Infinite was announced, how many of y'all had Firebrand returning on your bingo card? Firebrand might honestly be the most shocking returning character on the Capcom side. It's not like Gargoyle's Quest or Ghosts and Goblins for that matter had a resurgence then, and Firebrand only ever pops up once as fodder in the story mode. I don't hate that he's here or anything, especially since he got a few new tricks, but he absolutely wasn't a character I was expecting. Firebrand actually has a credited voice actor in Infinite, and James Corlett, who's done a ton of voice acting over the last 30 years. His most recent video game role was notably Dio in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth though. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but Firebrand is yet another returning Marvel 3 veteran that largely benefits from a lot of the new system mechanics in Marvel Infinite. He gets a handy new projectile with his tornado, which he can also interact with in an additional way. His mix-ups can get even dirtier, especially with the Space Stone, which he excels with. He's the only character in the game with 2 level 3s, which is nice. And he can make his jumping light punch and instant overhead with super hops. His defense still leaves a lot to be desired though, and some of his most difficult matchups in the game are against some of the more commonly played top tier characters. And honestly, he really needs his partner to get off some of his trickiest stuff. Firebrand's theme is yet again a remix of the Gargoyle's Quest title theme, though unlike Arthur, who retains a rock slant to his arrangement, this one's more dance oriented, which is actually in line with some of the other character themes for demons on the roster, like Jeddah. I kinda hated this theme at first, but it's honestly grown on me over time. I enjoy his Marvel 3 theme way more, but I think this one is pretty decent. I appreciate that it follows traditional song structure and isn't just a repetitive loop like some of the other songs in the game. Just like with every other returning veteran, Firebrand gets some command normals that were medium normals in previous games. That said, a lot of his moves have been consolidated into other motions compared to that game. Demonic Knife is done with forward and light punch.
First attack.
This used to be his standing medium in Marvel 3. Twin Fang is done with down forward and light punch.
First attack.
This was his crouching medium in Marvel 3. Devil's Claw is now done with down and heavy kick in the air. Just like in Marvel 3, this can be cancelled in the Hell Dive for combo follow-ups. Hell Spitfire is now done with a quarter circle forward and any attack button. Firebrand now gets 4 unique versions of this move as opposed to 3 in Marvel 3. Light punch functions like the light punch version in Marvel 3. Heavy punch functions like the medium version did there. And light kick is the OTG capable fireball from the heavy version in Marvel 3. Heavy kick now features a new fireball that arcs in the air before coming down on the opponent. Next up is an entirely new move, Tornado, done with a down-down in punch motion. Firebrand kicks up a tornado that lingers on screen for a bit. The heavy punch version has him push the tornado further out towards the opponent. This move is taken from Gargoyle's Quest 2, where it was an ability Firebrand could gain not too far into the game that allowed him to summon tornadoes to use as platforms. He can also interact with these tornadoes in a special way. Fire any variation of Hell Spitfire at a tornado and they'll explode into a pillar of flame. Hell's Elevator has 4 variants now, which depend on the strength of the punch or kick button pressed. Light punch goes straight up, but uniquely doesn't leave him in the flight state. Heavy punch goes up and forward, but does put him in the flight state. Light kick goes straight up, but puts him in the flight state. And heavy kick goes up and back, and wait for it, puts him in the flight state. Hell Dive similarly has 4 variations now that depend on the punch or kick button used. Light punch goes straight down. Heavy punch goes down and forward. Light kick simply initiates Firebrand's flight. And heavy kick goes down and back. Demon Missile is still done with a dragon punch motion, though again it encompasses both punches and kicks. The light punch version is the light variation from Marvel 3, while the heavy punch version is the medium cross-up tackle for Marvel 3 as well. The light kick version is the swooping attack, and it still retains its ability to be charged as well. The heavy kick version is actually his Bon Voyage attack for Marvel 3, now consolidated into a Demon Missile variant instead.
Wonderful. Spectacular.
Firebrand can still perform wall clings in Infinite. It's still possible to do instant wall cling fireballs as well, and in my opinion, they seem even easier to do this time around. Dark Fire is done with a quarter circle forward in both punches. It more or less retains most of his properties from Marvel 3.
Maximum.
Luminous Body is done with down down in 2 punches. This is also more or less similar to Marvel 3, though the model looks a bit more grotesque since you can see his veins and all. Firebrand's first level 3 is Chaos Tide, done with a down down in 2 kicks motion. It's mostly the same as in Marvel 3, though the Helper armor does get a new downwards angled fireball on light kick. The Helper also seems to be unaffected by Luminous Body this time around, unlike in Marvel 3. Bummer. Firebrand uniquely gets a second level 3, Red Blaze, done with a quarter circle forward in 2 kicks. This is a cinematic level 3, and something Firebrand definitely needed as far as damage and combo enders go. Red Blaze is of course the heroic title bestowed upon Firebrand and his eventual descendant in Gargoyle's Quest 2 and 1 respectively for saving the Ghoul Realm. Here are Firebrand's colors. Unlike in Marvel 3, Firebrand's colors for his base costume are explicit shoutouts to Demon's Crest. Color 2 is based on the Aerial Gargoyle, which had far greater flight capabilities than any other form in Demon's Crest. Color 3 is a nod to the Ground Gargoyle. This one gave Firebrand a unique tackle attack in Demon's Crest and was obtained after obtaining the Crest of Earth. Color 4 is a nod to the Tidal Gargoyle. Firebrand got this form after obtaining the Crest of Water in Demon's Crest, and this form predictably allows him to swim. Firebrand's alternate costume is the ultimate Gargoyle form from Demon's Crest. Firebrand obtains this form with the Crest of Infinity, which only appears when every other crest is gathered, and grants Firebrand every other crest's abilities all at once. Firebrand talks even less here than in Marvel 3, but he does have a scant few interactions.
Am I cursed to fight you in all worlds?
I'm not getting paid for this. You're a freebie.
I will enjoy having you live in torment for all eternity.
Why try to fight us? We who are God!
Even though Firebrand got into the Versus games over a character I would have been thrilled to see, I can't say I dislike how they implemented him. I actually think his Marvel Infinite incarnation might just be my favorite of his appearances, given he's generally a great character overall there, and there's a few more nods to the Gargoyle's Quest Trilogy to find there. Given Red Armors are a staple Capcom baddie, he'll probably pop up in future games in varying capacities. They're in the super difficult but excellent Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection once again as an enemy of Arthur, and some generic ones are enemies in Namco Crest Capcom as well as its 3DS sequels. They've even made cameos or have been shouted out in other games over the years as well. A Red Armor shows up as a boss in one of Capcom's earlier arcade games, Black Tiger, and the first Disney Magical Quest game features a mini-boss that's very obviously a send-up of Red Armor. It does bear mentioning that the Magical Quest games in particular were largely designed by the same staff responsible for Super Ghouls and Ghosts, so that tracks. That's going to do it for this video. As always, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you next time.